Hello and welcome back to my channel. I really like science. I think it's really cool. I think it's really useful. I'm Sian, I'm a sports nutritionist, and for the last 6 months, I've been researching REDS, Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport. And today, I'm going to tell you all about my research project. If you're watching my content, it's probably not a surprise to you that there's been a huge boom in endurance running in the last few years. Participation is climbing every year, and the most recent London Marathon ballot broke all world records and had over 1.1 million applicants. That's 300,000 more than last year alone. I've just run the Berlin Marathon and I can tell you it was busy. But the thing with marathon training is that it imposes significant energy demands on the body and there's considerable injury risk. One study of participants doing the New York City Marathon found that 43% of runners reported an injury. As part of this, adequate nutrition is vital to support your training and prevent injury. And this is where something called low energy availability comes in. 70% of endurance runners will experience low energy availability at some point in their running careers. And low energy availability is a state that comes about when the energy you're expending for running and everything else exceeds what you're taking in. And then your body basically ends up without enough energy to cover all of its normal processes. And this is a massive red flag for injury risk because 21% of runners will end up with some form of bone stress injury. And we know that low energy availability is a massive predictor for this. So this state of low energy availability that we can find ourselves in as runners, when it's problematic and long term, can result in something called REDS, Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport. So the International Olympic Committee first defined this in 2014. So it came from the female athlete triad, but we've now gone, oh, hang on a minute, it can happen to all athletes, not just females. So the definition, according to the International Olympic Committee of REDS, is a syndrome of impaired physiological and/or psychological functioning experienced by male and female athletes that is caused by exposure to problematic, being prolonged and/or severe, low energy availability. And this is the current model of REDS. So what this does is it shows you how the low energy availability at the center and the core of the module can affect everything else. If that's what REDS is, where lots of runners do end up with bone stress injuries, they might lose their periods, they might lose their male morning erectile function, runners will have issues with lots of different hormones when they have their bloods done and they have REDS. It's not one thing, and in every athlete, REDS will look different. So it's not going, oh yes, you tick XYZ box, therefore you have REDS, you don't have exactly the same of them, so you don't have it. Your REDS just might look different. Because when you put a body in a low state of energy availability, it will pick and choose itself what it's going to shut off, because that's essentially what's happening here. So that low energy availability, where the energy output is more than the energy being taken in, so more than you're eating, your body goes, right, look around, hang on lads, what have we not got energy to do? So this might be that resting heart rate that's super low that you think is a flex, might not be. It will stop repairing your bones so well. It'll stop recovery so well. You might have issues sleeping. You might be constantly thinking about food. You're always tired. You don't want to socialize. There's lots of different ways that REDS can manifest. But the problem is, at the moment, all the tools designed to look at athletes with REDS just tell us it's too late. So they are basically just identifying these symptoms of REDS that are coming out of the REDS model. So there's the LEAF-Q and the LEAM-Q, which are male and female questionnaires, which kind of point towards kind of REDS, low energy availability risk, and potentially eating disorders and send people down that pathway. There's the REDS-CAT2, which the International Olympic Committee came out with in 2023. That is definitely is a great tool, but it tells you it's too late. So what happened was a group of scientists headed up by Asker Jørgentrup came up with the athlete health and readiness checklist. So the whole idea here is, if you look at this picture, so this is something I've made, this low energy availability boundary here. All these things that happen up here, which are all symptoms of low energy availability, which can all happen without an athlete having REDS, they're all up here. Once you cross over the boundary into REDS, that's where all of these existing tools will catch an athlete. All of these existing tools will tell you, yes, there is a problem here. Whereas the athlete health and readiness checklist looks at going backwards a step. So it looks at athletes and across 8 categories goes Is there a reason to be concerned here about this athlete? Is there a risk here that they have low energy availability, that it's going to develop, and that they might end up developing REDS? So the whole idea is that they're picked and plucked out before it gets too late. Another problem is that we don't really know a lot about the athlete lived experience. So what does an athlete actually experience when they're going through this process? What drives them into REDS? What gets them there? What's keeping them there? What pressures are on them? A holistic view of the athlete, so not just looking at them as a track score or a muscle squat ability or the fact that they've been to training every single week. It's looking at an athlete in a bigger picture. So how's their home life? How are they sleeping? How are they eating? What's their attitude like? What are the drivers in here? Have they got money problems, family problems? Are they always arguing with their boyfriend or their girlfriend? Are there things going on that are adding stress to this athlete outside of the stress of training? And if you think about the majority of marathon runners, so our everyday people, because we're not just talking about elite athletes here, that is actually not the group we're looking at. I chose in my study to look at athletes who were aiming for a championship time, so very, very good club level athletes, but they're not professionals by any means. So they're also balancing jobs, family lives, social lives, everything else. If they're training, they're trying to balance with performing these incredible marathon times. So that's another thing that this study looks at, is the athlete lived experience. And I'm doing it in a qualitative way, which means talking and speaking rather than numbers. So essentially, all of this is teeing up that more and more people are marathon running. REDS and low energy availability is a topic that not loads of people have heard of, but can be a massive problem for athletes, ending up broken with bone stress injuries and any type of injury, burning out and dropping out of running, getting trapped in really negative cycles that are basically just ruining these runners' health and wellness. But there's no way to tell them or help them apart from saying, it's too late, this runner's broken. So the aims of my study were to check if the athlete health and readiness tool could actually have flagged these runners as being at risk, and then explore their lived experience. So that means looking at their attitudes, their beliefs and their behaviours before, during and after a bone stress injury, as well as looking at their attitude to education. Because education is one of the biggest things that lots of people who are working in REDS are calling for. So my study had 3 phases: a recruitment phase, an interview phase, an analysis phase. So I used Instagram. I recruited runners through there, I recruited runners through my running club, I had the help of Project REDS and the running room, and I managed to get lots of runners to fill out an initial questionnaire for me, basically registering their interest in the study. If they met the criteria, so they were over 18 and an endurance runner competing over the half and full marathon, they had completed or were aiming to hit Championship London Marathon times, so that is 3:10 for a female and 2:38 for a man. And they've experienced a bone stress injury in the previous 18 months that was validated by a scan, and they've started a return to run protocol. So I picked 4 men and 4 women who fit this criteria and invited them to take part in the study. So this meant getting all their consent, because I was recording audio, the interviews, consent that they were willing to be part of this paper, and giving them more information about the background of it, the potential risk. That's all kind of the information I had to give the participants beforehand. Very luckily, all 8 of them agreed to be part of it, and I then went to interviews. So I used a semi-structured, open-ended interview approach, which basically means I had a big old list of questions, and it kind of guided us through a running journey. But one thing that did happen was that I did have to exclude one of the men upon interview, because it turns out he didn't actually meet the criteria of the study. So I had to exclude him and all the data related to him. We then couldn't find another male to fill in, so we ended up with 7 participants. So I recorded all of these interviews, transcribed them, and then we started analysing. So this is where the results come in. In terms of the AHARC, all 7 of these athletes would have been flagged as at risk of REDS before their injury. The problem here is that of these 7 athletes, only 3 had coaches overseeing their training. And this is an inherent issue with this tool, that what it means is if and this is going to be applied, an athlete needs to have someone overseeing their training who has knowledge of the tool, knowledge of REDS, knowledge of low energy availability and training, knowledge of the athlete's holistic setup, and needs to have access to the correct referral pathways. We can see where this gets tricky, because actually a lot of these athletes don't have that setup. They're not within clubs. They're not got a coach overseeing what they're doing at work and day to day in their recovery. A lot of it is on the athlete themselves, which is why any education has to stretch beyond just the professionals. We then move on to looking at the athlete lived experience. So this is where I've done a reflexive thematic analysis. That basically means I trawled through all the transcripts, coded them, so you basically end up with a massive Excel spreadsheet of all little ideas of what all these different quotes and things mean, and then you smush it all together, and then you turn it into codes, and then you turn it into themes, and then you turn it into sub-themes and overarching themes, and it all gets very messy, and you end up with these massive diagrams and post-it notes everywhere and some massive Excel documents. And then I basically hash it out with my tutor. So she challenges me on what I've thought, and basically encouraging me to look at it in a different way, seeing if it fits together differently, moving it all around like a big jigsaw to come out with this tree, basically. So saying, okay, this is the overarching topic, the title of the thing, and then we're breaking it down into 3 sub-themes: drive versus destruction, in control out of balance, and from insight to injury. So the first, drive versus destruction. So this theme is basically exploring the theme of drive and how actually that really socially valuable trait of drive can function maladaptively, so go wrong, and force an athlete down a path where they're just literally driving themselves into the dirt. And that really high motivation and pursuing a goal at any cost can ultimately mean injury-related withdrawal from sport. The sub-themes of this were wired to achieve, which is also something that some other researchers have noted in the motivation of athletes with REDS, that they have an inherent drive and motivation. And also that they've been overriding warning signs. So they're ignoring what their physios and their coaches are saying. They're ignoring their bodies. Even if they have that kind of naggy feeling, they're ignoring it. They're ignoring their families. And they're just going, no, I'm going to run through it. And all of the athletes I interviewed reported running through pain. And this drive all translates into also how they reflect on training. So the second theme, in control out of balance, looks at the attitude to training and how unbalanced attitudes to nutrition, recovery, sleep, rest, all of that is, as well as then looking at using knowledge as control. So this theme is split in 2 and then has further sub-themes. The first half is more work, more reward. So I noted that all of the athletes I interviewed had an inherent belief that more is more. When that came to training, not when that came to weight, and not when that came to nutrition, but that the more effort they put in, the more reward they would get, because that's what they were getting in other areas of their life. When we're looking at their attitude to food, there was a lot of fixation around it. 4 of the participants had issues with disordered eating or eating disorders. Then when we're looking at weight, there was a real analytical approach to weight for the 3 men I interviewed. So this was all around the belief that lighter is faster. And then when we were looking at training, it being never enough, that they were always pushing themselves, always seeking more. They didn't see the restraint to stop, and they weren't applying normal training practices to themselves. They thought that it didn't apply to them. And that's where this knowledge as control comes in. So 6 out of the 7 athletes reported reading scientific literature as part of their research into running, which I am totally for, but not if we're cherry picking the conclusions. So taking these conclusions and actually applying them how they wanted to support their maladaptive beliefs was actually locking them further into a cognitively biased state where they were just taking the information that they wanted to hear and using it to justify their approach, even though they knew it wasn't right, but they were doing it anyway. And one of the participants was saying that my internal monologue is justifying taking a completely different approach for reasons that make sense only in my brain, which actually I think is something that a lot of runners sometimes can align with. We actually think, oh no, but I'm different, oh it'll be fine this time, oh blah, 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 blah. And then maybe once or twice it is, and your brain goes, oh yeah, cool, sweet, it's fine this time. But then actually it's the long-term effects of this and constantly believing that it's an experiment of one and that you're a bit of an enigma. And that's where you can get trapped in these thought patterns and beliefs. Because all participants were also engaging with social media. They were looking to athletes, other runners, forums, all sorts of places, and actually taking this information as instruction and then applying it how they wanted to their running. So they were all overtraining, under-eating, under-recovering, and actually cognitively locking themselves in cycles that were leading to injury. And that's where this last theme comes in, from injury to insight. And this is basically talking about the injury journey, how upon accepting their injury and starting to reflect, athletes were actually able to move forward. It really highlights how recovery in this context, where low energy availability and potentially REDs are involved, is as psychological as it is physiological. Because for some athletes, they'd had multiple cycles of bone stress injuries. And it's when they get locked in these multiple cycles, it's because a behavior or a cognition isn't changing. They're healing from this one thing, but they're just staying locked in it. And again, this is stuff other researchers have seen too. They've seen how actually athletes with REDs can get locked in these cycles. Most of them were surprised when their injury initially occurred, because you're always fine until you're not. And then it was through retrospective understanding and education that they were able to start seeing how what they'd been doing had got them to where they are. People described positive role models and social media actually playing a really big part in getting them back on track and keeping them there. Especially athlete stories from other athletes who've had similar experiences. They have to rebuild from the inside out, their bones and their behaviors. And it really does show it's not just physical. The psychological side of it is just as big, if not bigger. And that's where education plays a huge role, because there's the learning of what they should be doing, but also the unlearning of the old behaviors and actually disengaging from these. Education prompted athletes to reflect and help put in place things that will stop them getting injured in the future. It helped them to analyze their behaviors and their thought patterns and actually move away from things that weren't helping them. By looking at what's happened to other athletes and how they've got through it, it helped a lot of them from going from this state of knowing what was right to actually believing it and applying it to themselves. And again, this all just supports what the International Olympic Committee and lots of other REDS groups are saying about how important education is, because REDS is completely preventable. And practically what this means is that it's really clear we should be using the AHARC to help identify athletes who are at risk. Coaches, clinicians, physios, doctors, everyone working with athletes should be aware of the categories in the AHARC. But like I've said, the problem is with athletes who don't have anyone looking out for them. And actually, maybe if everyone was aware of these categories and could help look out for red flags in themselves and their friends, it might be useful. But we need that investment in education around the tool and REDS itself. There needs to be layered signposting methods for clinicians and athletes, and somewhere that they can get information they trust. Like any research, there are limitations to my study. Firstly, there was only 7 participants after we excluded one of the men. There is an inherent limitation on the fact this relies on self-reported retrospective accounts, because there also might be social or cognitive bias towards the previous things. There were restraints in the study in the fact that all of these athletes had experienced a bone stress injury, so actually there is a very specific group of people these conclusions apply to. And thematic analysis itself is a completely subjective interpretation. As an insider, being the author, I'm an endurance marathon runner targeting championship times, who runs for a club, is over 18, has a history of bone stress injury and REDs. I could be biased, which is why I then have other authors around who challenge my thoughts and challenge my themes. Ideally, future research would have a much bigger population size, and also not only recruit through social media, because what this does is it skews the education resources people have been using and like to use. Because everyone in this study said they like videos and athlete experience and written things, which is kind of Instagram and YouTube. And if I found everyone on Instagram, kind of might have some bias in there. So in conclusion, everyone should be using the AHARC, and exploring athlete lived experience through their bone stress injury journey showed that recovery from REDs, bone stress injury, low energy availability and return to running is not just physical, it is hugely psychological. And without that psychological aspect, runners can't get back to and return to running for the long term. We need effective educational interventions. We need to develop more trustworthy sources of education for clinicians and athletes. And we need to help build protocols where people can be referred for help. Because what this is going to do is it's going to support athletes, increase awareness of RED-S, and acknowledge that it's not just your training and eating that contribute to your problems. It's everything. It's the whole holistic athlete. We need to treat people as people, not just runners with a bone stress injury. So that's my research project. I've kind of done quite an academic overview for you, because honestly, when I start talking to people about this, like in the wild, and people ask me about what I research and what I've been looking at and what I've found, I really get into it. But it's because RED-S really is totally preventable, and there are so many things that we could do and put in place to help so many people and stop them getting to the point where this is such a big problem that people are breaking their bones in their early 20s because they didn't know certain things and because they hadn't had that one bit of help when they were much younger. And there's so many people who are dancing that fine line of RED-S. Also, it's for people, not just the people who have RED-S who are in so deep. It's this huge group of people down here who think this doesn't even apply to them, who actually could hugely benefit from education around nutrition, looking after their body and balancing training and life stress. So I hope you found this interesting, and I would also love if you could leave me a comment. Well, I'd love if you could subscribe actually, because I like making YouTube videos, but I would love if you could leave me a comment about any questions you have on this. And also, I want to know, what is your favorite educational platform? Is it Instagram, TikTok, YouTube? Like, where are you getting your education? Because I want to help. And if there are any nutrition topics that you want more any nutrition topics you want more nutrition on, if there are any nutrition topics you want a deeper dive into, leave them in the comments for me, because I'm going to be making a lot more science YouTube now, because now my Berlin series is over. I have got some other exciting things on the cards, not quite so running related, but I won't be running around London for a while, so stay tuned if you want to see more of that. And yeah, I really like science. I think it's really cool. I think it's really useful. So hopefully I will be doing lots more studies in the future because, yeah, I really like it, to be honest. Also go check out Project RED-S if you haven't. I will leave their Instagram and mine down below, and have a nice rest of your day.